Today you will hear the story of Omar Hassan, a respected imam, admired by his community and known for his firm speech against Christianity. For many years, he believed that his mission was to protect the Islamic faith by attacking everything on the other side, and he took pride in seeing his son, Karim Hassan, follow the same path. It was in this setting that a decisive moment arose. A public debate with Charlie Kirk, broadcast to thousands of people. Omar saw in his son the chance to prove the superiority of his belief, but he had no idea that those words exchanged on stage would be the trigger for the greatest battle of his life. Something began to collapse inside. What seemed like just another intellectual confrontation turned into a silent crisis, one that would lead him to nights of doubt, to a supernatural visitation, and finally, to a miracle impossible to explain. But even after the transformation, Omar would face one last trial, a turning point that would put his life and everything he had built at risk. And before we dive into this testimony full of surprises, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel, leave your like, and comment which city or country you are watching us from. This story will move you from beginning to end.
My name's Omar Hassan. When I look back and introduce myself to you today, it feels like I'm speaking of another life. I'm 52 years old, and for many years I was known as an imam in my community. I was not just any religious leader, I was the voice of authority, the man who rose in the early hours of the morning to study the Quran, who guided men in important decisions, and who shaped the lives of entire families with my words. I believed that my duty was to be a guardian of traditions, someone who would not let the faith be lost amid external influences. My routine was rigid, almost inflexible. Even before the first call to prayer, when there was still absolute silence outside, I was already awake. I would sit on my worn-out rug, open the holy book, and spend hours reciting, memorizing, reflecting. Each early morning was a ritual, and each verse became a shield against any doubt that dared to be born within me. I believed that discipline was the only way to keep my faith strong, and that discipline became the foundation of my reputation. In the mosque, my presence commanded respect. When I stepped up to speak, the environment fell silent. Men bowed their heads, families looked at me as if my words were orders, and even the children grew up hearing that Omar Hassan was a man of certainty. I spoke harshly against Christians. I called them deceived, idolaters, said they had turned faith into a lie and that they followed paths of confusion. My voice echoed with firmness, and every phrase was received as absolute truth. People believed I was unshakable, and I thought the same of myself. But behind all that respect were scars I hid even from myself. I carried memories of friends who never returned from battles, companions who disappeared amid violent conflicts. I also felt the weight of humiliation suffered by my people, moments when we were treated as strangers in our own land. Those pains made me hard. I told myself that only rigidity would keep me standing, and that is why I never left room for doubts or weaknesses. Even at home, my posture was one of absolute authority. There was, however, one point that filled me with pride and softened my expression: my son, Karim Hassan. From an early age, he showed unusual intelligence, a quick mind, capable of arguing firmly in front of anyone. I saw him as my reflection, the continuation of my legacy. When I watched him studying, repeating my phrases, and passionately defending the convictions I had taught him, my heart swelled with satisfaction. Karim was, for me, the proof that my effort would not be in vain. I remember clearly the day my son Karim came to me with that determined look he always carried when he believed he was facing a great opportunity. He entered the house almost unable to contain his excitement and told me that he had discovered a debate event. It was not just any meeting. The name he spoke made my heart beat faster: Charlie Kirk. I had already heard of this man. I knew he was known for his firmness in defending Christianity before any audience, for never backing down even in the face of aggressive opponents. For many in my community, he was considered a threat, but for Karim it sounded like the perfect challenge. He looked me in the eyes and said that he wanted to participate. He spoke with passion, with that flame that I myself had nurtured within him since he was little. For him, this debate was not just a chance to stand out. It was the opportunity to publicly prove that Christianity was nothing more than a corrupted religion, full of flaws, sustained by historical lies. He believed that, with his sharp reasoning, he could intellectually defeat an influential man, and thus bring pride to his father and strength to his own faith. I listened to every word of Karim, and deep down, my heart filled with pride. It was as if I was seeing myself younger, inflamed with convictions and ready to confront anyone who dared to rise against what I believed to be the truth. I did not hesitate to encourage him. I placed my hand on his shoulder and said firmly, "Go and show them, my son. Show that the truth does not need adornments, that the truth stands on its own, that Islam is sufficient, and that anyone who tries to place another faith before us will fall before your conviction. Those words were like fuel for his decision. The days leading up to the debate were marked by intense preparation. Karim spent hours reviewing texts, memorizing arguments, organizing his speeches as if he were preparing for a battle. I watched him from a distance, with eyes full of satisfaction. It was like watching the making of a warrior, someone about to wield not a sword, but words as sharp as blades. With every rehearsed phrase, I felt more certain that he would honor our name and our faith before everyone. When the day of the debate arrived, I remember the tension in the air. I could not be there physically, but I followed every moment through the broadcast. I sat in my chair, adjusted my clothes, and remained still, attentive, as if every word spoken was an arrow shot into my own heart. The audience was full, and on the other side, sitting with serenity, was Charlie Kirk. My son showed no fear. He was firm, upright, convinced that he would win. The moderator began, and soon Karim took the floor. His voice sounded strong, full of conviction. He attacked without mercy. He said that Christianity had been used to justify wars, persecutions, and corruption throughout history. He called Christians deceived, followers of a distorted book. His words were sharp, prepared to strike at the heart of the opponent and the audience. With each argument he raised, I felt my chest swell with pride. That is my son, I thought. That is the reflection of what I taught, the proof that I did not waste my life. For a few moments I felt victorious. It seemed that every criticism, every accusation, every phrase spoken was a victory not only for Karim but also for me. It was as if I were on stage, speaking through him. I could see on the faces of the audience that some were uncomfortable, others impacted. I thought, this is how a lie is dismantled. This is how an enemy is defeated. But then something unexpected happened. When it came time for Charlie to respond, I expected him to get heated, to try to strike back with the same force. I expected a fierce counterattack full of justifications and aggressive defenses. But that was not what happened. He remained calm. His voice did not rise. There was no hatred, no anger. He began by saying that he understood the pain many had felt throughout history, that he knew of the mistakes committed in the name of religion, but that the essence of the Christian faith was not in those mistakes. He spoke about freedom, about forgiveness, about how Christ did not come to establish a religion of wars, but came to transform hearts. At that moment, I felt something strange inside me. It was not the pride from before. It was not the sensation of victory. It was something I did not know how to name. Charlie's words did not sound like those of a man trying to win a debate. He was not trying to defeat my son with logic. He was speaking of love, of something that went beyond arguments. When he said, "It is not by winning debates that we change lives, but by loving those who hate us," I felt as if that phrase had crossed the space and fallen directly upon me. I tried to push the thought away, tried to convince myself that it was only well-crafted rhetoric. But his serenity contrasted so much with Karim's aggressiveness that, for the first time, I perceived a crack in my own heart. I was not prepared for this. I, who had always prided myself on my rigidity, found myself disturbed by a peace I could not understand. I will never forget what I felt when those words came out of Charlie's mouth. I expected a fierce counterattack. I expected him to raise his voice to defend his faith with the same aggressive tone my son had used, but that was not what happened. He looked at Karim calmly, with a serenity that was almost disconcerting, and said, "It is not by winning debates that we change lives, but by loving those who hate us." It was as if time had stopped in that instant. I, who had spent my entire life believing that the path was strength, that respect was earned through the harshness of words and the rigidity of discipline, found myself disarmed before a simple phrase, yet one loaded with something I could not explain. It was not anger that I felt. It was not even irritation. What was born inside me was restlessness, a strange, uncomfortable feeling, as if a door had been left slightly open within my heart. I tried to resist, tried to push that sensation away, but it did not disappear. On the contrary, it grew silently, like a seed thrown into dry soil that, even without water, finds a way to sprout. That night, after the debate ended, I remained in my chair for long minutes, staring at the now dark screen. The pride I felt at the beginning had dissolved into something that would not let me rest. I thought, why will those words not leave my mind? Why do I feel as though I have been exposed before everyone, even while being alone? I wanted to believe it was just a momentary reaction, the result of exhaustion, but the truth is that this unease followed me into the early morning hours. I tried to sleep, but my eyes refused to close. Each time I lay down, I remembered the tone of his voice, the serenity with which he said that it was not through debates that someone was changed, but through love. I'd never heard anyone speak like that. My entire life had been built upon confrontation, upon logic, upon hardness. Love for me was only a word used in family speeches, not a principle capable of changing someone. And now I found myself a prisoner of a phrase that challenged the entire foundation of my existence. In the days that followed, the restlessness grew even more intense. I replayed the debate countless times, trying to find flaws. I watched every gesture, every response of Charlie, trying to find a gap, a contradiction, something that could ease the pressure growing inside me. But instead of finding errors, I only found coherence, serenity, and firmness. He was not just a man defending ideas, he was someone speaking with conviction of something that came from within. And that disarmed me with each new attempt. The nights became long. I would rise, walk around the house, return to watch the video again. My mind screamed to reject it, but my heart could no longer pretend. I remembered his words as if they had been spoken directly to me, not to my son. I asked myself, have I spent years of my life teaching hatred when I should have been teaching love? Has all my rigidity been nothing more than a mask to hide wounds that never healed? These questions were like hammer blows inside my chest. It was then that, in the early hours of the morning, unable to bear the weight of that inner struggle any longer, I did something I never thought I would do. For the first time in my life, I uttered a sincere prayer. Without formulas, without repetitions, without the weight of tradition. I simply looked into the emptiness of my room and said, "Show me the truth, even if it hurts." Those words came out as a whisper, but they carried the full weight of my soul. I did not know exactly to whom I was speaking, but within me there was a hunger, a need for an answer. I wanted someone in some way to show me what was real, what was absolute. That night I could no longer fight against the restlessness that had been consuming me for days. The words echoing inside me would not let me rest. I had tried to suffocate the voice that was calling me, had tried to ignore that weight, but there came a moment when I could no longer endure it. It was early morning, the house was immersed in silence, and I rose from the rug where I had so many times repeated the same traditional prayers. But this time I could not follow any ritual, any memorized phrase. I sat on the cold floor, leaned my back against the wall, and let out a cry from within me that I had never dared to speak. I spoke with desperation, with my soul stripped of any pride. Allah, if you are truth, show me. But if there is something I do not know, something beyond what I have spent my life defending, then please reveal it to me. Show me the truth, even if it hurts. I did not expect an answer. I was used to repeating words, not to expecting something living in return. But in that instant, something different happened. The air around me seemed to change, as if it had become heavier and at the same time lighter. I felt a presence that did not come from me, did not come from my tired mind. And suddenly, an intense light filled the room. It was not an ordinary light, not the flame of a candle, nor the reflection of the moon through the window. It was a light that did not hurt the eyes but penetrated directly into the heart. I remained still, paralyzed by astonishment. It was then that I heard a voice. It was not loud, it was not threatening. It was gentle, yet it carried an authority that did not need to shout. The words still echo within me as if they were spoken just now. I did not come to destroy your faith. I came to set your heart free. When I heard this, my legs simply gave way. I fell to my knees, and all the pride I had carried for years was broken in that moment. I cried as I had never cried in my entire life. The tears flowed uncontrollably, and I felt every part of my being stripped of the hardness that had accompanied me since youth. It was as if a weight I had carried for decades had been lifted at once. I remembered the friends I lost, the humiliations endured, the words of hatred I had preached so many times, and all of that seemed to collapse before a presence that surrounded me with love. I could not explain it. How could a man who had built his entire life on discipline and harshness be undone by such a gentle voice? But that was what was happening. The more I cried, the more I felt a love I had never experienced. A love that did not accuse me, but embraced me. It was in that moment of total surrender that the door to the room opened. I heard footsteps, lifted my tear-stained face, and saw my son Karim standing at the entrance. He had just returned from the debate. I will never forget the look on his face at that instant. He, who had always seen me as a hard, unshakable man, now found me on my knees, broken, crying before something he could not see. His eyes widened, and his silence spoke more than any word. I did not know what to say. Part of me wanted to hide, to stand and pretend nothing was happening, but I could not. I was overtaken, surrendered, incapable of disguise. Karim took a few steps inside, confused, almost afraid. He looked around as if he wanted to understand what was there. He could not see the light that surrounded me, but he sensed that there was something different in that room. And I, still on my knees, could do nothing but continue crying. I saw on his face a mixture of shock and pain. For him, who had grown up admiring my strength, to see me fragile in that way was like watching a mountain collapse. But at the same time, there was something in his eyes that revealed more than surprise. It was as if, even without understanding, he knew he was standing before something real, something that surpassed the logic of any argument. His silence, his fixed gaze, the tremor in his hands, all of it showed that he was being impacted, even without comprehending. In that moment, father and son were united not by the rigid tradition that had always connected us, but by something that was only beginning. I cried before the invisible, and he cried before the inexplicable. I had no answers to give him, no prepared speech, no defense. There was only that instant, that presence, and that love that completely disarmed me. I know that even today people may doubt, may try to explain it with technical words or theories. But I was there. I felt the light, I heard the voice, I was broken as never before. And I know that Karim saw with his own eyes the man he knew undone before something greater. It was not imagination. It was real. It was supernatural. In the days that followed, I tried to resume my routine as if nothing had happened. I spoke with neighbors, responded to greetings on the street, led prayers with the same gravity. But the peace I had felt that early morning walked with me like a discreet light that insists on breaking through the cracks of a dark house. I could no longer speak with the same harshness. The words came out slower, more careful, and that did not go unnoticed. First, it was the men closest to me, those who always occupied the front row. I noticed crossed glances, whispers, small questions trying to measure how far I had gone. Then came the mothers, always sensitive to changes of spirit. "Omar, is everything all right? Your voice sounds different." I replied that yes. But the truth is that I was fighting a silent battle between the honor of my reputation and the honesty of my heart. The news spread before I even had words to explain it. Someone said that my son had debated with an influential Christian. Someone said that that very night I had been seen with red eyes. Someone said they heard me ask forgiveness from a person I had treated harshly years ago. Versions multiplied. In little time, the questions became accusations. Omar has changed. Omar is confused. Omar has let strange ideas in. Some were harsher. Omar has betrayed our trust. And then came the labels that cut like blades. Traitor, heretic. I, who for decades had been called a guardian, came to be seen as a threat to order. The transformation of reputations is swift when people's hearts are fed by fear. The loss of status did not happen overnight, but came in waves. First, they discreetly withdrew invitations that once were certain. Then they changed the schedule of meetings without consulting me. Later, I noticed that parallel gatherings were happening without my presence. In public, some still smiled with respect. In private, rejection grew like weeds in a courtyard. Former students, young men I had taught to argue, began to treat my words as if they had lost weight. I walked down the street and noticed doors that once opened quickly, now closing a second earlier. It was not violence. It was social exclusion, silent, calculated. And paradoxically, at the center of this hidden storm, the peace I had felt in that room remained steady, as if an invisible arm held my shoulders from within. Karim was the one who felt the impact most strongly. He observed me in silence, trying to decipher who I had become. One late afternoon in the kitchen, his question came sharp. The way we had always trained ideas not to stray from the essential, you taught me to fight against them, and now you join them. He was not shouting. He was hurt. It was the son speaking to the father, but also the disciple disoriented with the master. There was anger, yes, but beneath it there was a desperate plea for coherence. I wanted to embrace him and say everything, but the words that fit in my mouth were few. "Son, I have not joined anyone against you. Something found me." He furrowed his brow. "What's something?" I took a deep breath. "A peace I cannot deny." In the days that followed, the older leaders requested conversations. At first, cordial meetings. "Omar, we are hearing rumors. We need your clarity." I told them the truth carefully, that I had been touched by a peace that made me reconsider the hardness of my heart, that I could no longer use the same language against those who thought differently, that mercy was not weakness. They listened, but their eyes grew heavy. In a second stage, the conversations took on corrective tones. "You are opening dangerous gaps. The community is watching. Be firmer, speak as before." I went up to speak and searched for the old rigidity, but every sentence sounded empty to me. I saw faces, stories, pain, and I could no longer reduce people to labels. When the speech ended, came the final advice. "Take some time, Omar. Step away for a while. Reflect." It was a polite way of removing me from the center. The rejection from former followers hurt more than I imagined. With every turned face, with every handshake that did not come, I was reminded of my own words in the past, harsh, cold words that I now faced with shame. At night I sat on the same rug and in silence remembered every sermon, every phrase I had thrown like a stone. My heart tightened. It was not paralyzing guilt, but a burning clarity. I saw myself clearly, striking where I should have cared, feeding pride where I should have served. I said if I could go back I would have spoken differently, and even so the peace remained. It was not the peace of public approval. It was the peace of one who has been seen from within and not rejected. A peace that told me, walk, I am with you. The community quickly turned unease into action. Extraordinary meetings appeared, letters of concern, messages asking me to publicly clarify my position. Some insinuated that I had been pressured by outside influences. Others demanded that I redo old statements to reassure families. I understood the movement. It was not only about doctrine. It was about the emotional security of a group that had always looked to me as a reference. And when the reference changes, the wall of fear shifts with it. Still, it hurt to see my name circulate as a warning, as if I were a risk. I, who had preached discipline, became a figure of doubt. Karim, pressured by friends, began to be pushed into a public stance against me. Direct messages reached him, some cloaked in zeal, others in emotional threat. If you love your people, you need to show firmness against error. He came into my room one night, his eyes full of tears, his voice tense. Father, they want me to speak against you. They say that if I defend you, I will be turning my back on everything you've taught me. I tried to extend my hand, but he stepped back half a step, not out of disrespect, but out of confusion. I said, I understand, my son. I do not want anyone to choose between me and you all. I only do not want you to deny what you saw that early morning. He pressed his lips together, fragile and angry at the same time. I saw you crying, but I saw nothing else. His sincerity cut deep. I know, I replied. Even so, something was there. It was in that climate that the local council scheduled an assembly in the main square. They spoke of community clarity, of protecting the flock, of guarding unity. I knew what was coming. Before the meeting, two leaders called me aside and were direct. Some families want you to leave the city for a time until things calm down. I asked, and you? One of them, an old friend, lowered his eyes. We are trying to prevent this from becoming something bigger. I gave a tired smile. It already has, my brother. But not because of me. I left that conversation with shaky legs and the same steady peace in my chest. The cost was coming, and though I could not yet measure its size, I could no longer desire a return to the man I once was. On the appointed day, the square was full. There were onlookers, there were families, there were tense faces and crossed arms. I saw children holding their mothers' hands. I saw young people with cell phones ready to record. I saw men who once shared a table with me now staring at me as if I were a stranger. The moderator climbed onto a makeshift wooden platform, gave a formal speech, and called me forward. I walked slowly, not out of fear, but because each step seemed to demand from me a new honesty. When I took the microphone, the sound failed for a second. I heard the memory of my own voice from other times, firm, aggressive. I breathed. The first questions came like arrows. Do you regret what you taught? Have you embraced another faith? Are you deceiving the people? I listened, one by one, and responded with the care of someone walking on narrow ground. I said I regretted the harshness, not the search for truth. I said I had not embraced enemies. I had embraced people. I said my conscience had been visited by a peace that prevented me from treating human beings as labels. I explained with the utmost respect that I could no longer reduce a complex story to slogans of conflict. Some shook their heads in denial, others exchanged glances. And then someone shouted, from a place I could not see, "He betrayed the faith." The word traitor vibrated through the wood of the platform. The atmosphere soured, voices overlapped. The moderator called for calm, and it was in this turmoil that I noticed, standing to the left, near a post, my son Karim. He looked smaller than usual, as if his clothes weighed upon him. Beside him, two young men whispered and pointed at me, waiting for a gesture from him. I understood. They wanted my son to deny me there in public so that I would be framed as an isolated deviation without heirs. I felt a tightening that mixed fatherhood, honor, and pain, and at the same time, peace. Always peace. Then came the final clarification point. A leader approached me and without a microphone, so that only we and those in the front could hear, said, Omar, if you declare now that you went too far, that you will return to your old firmness, we will end this with honor. You will recover your position. The city needs stability. The proposal came wrapped in concern, but inside it was a choice between mask and truth. I closed my eyes for 2 seconds, and within me, the same gentle voice as before seemed to whisper without words, remain. When I opened my eyes, I returned the microphone to the stand and spoke loud enough to cut through the noise. I know many here loved me when I seemed unshakable. Today I am weak before you, but strong in the peace I found. I will not deny this peace. The leader tried to interrupt, but the crowd asked me to finish. And then I said, with my throat burning and my whole body aware of the cost, I would rather lose everything than deny the one who gave me life. There was no oratory, no preparation. It was the conclusion of an internal battle that no longer allowed retreats. The silence that followed lasted less than a breath, but to me it seemed to stretch like a corridor. Then came the reactions. Part of the crowd erupted in accusations. I heard harsh words, words I myself had once spoken against others. It hurt to recognize them as mirrors. Another part, smaller, did not move. They were few, but their eyes held something different, as if they had seen in my exposed weakness a trace of truth that speeches cannot offer. I saw an elderly woman place her hand on her chest. I saw a young man lower his phone and simply stare at me. I saw a man press his lips to hold back tears. Among those few, my eyes sought Karim's. My son was still near the post. The people around him insisted with gestures for him to speak, but he seemed frozen in a kind of listening that is not done with the ears. Our eyes met, and something broke. I saw his eyes fill with water. He tried to swallow what rose from within, but he could not. The hand holding the phone trembled, and for the first time since that early morning he cried. It was not the cry of defeat. It was the cry of someone who realizes that the world no longer fits into two boxes. That pierced me deeper than any word. I did not expect a gesture from him there. I only did not want to lose him. And yet, without saying anything, he revealed to me that he too had been reached by something he did not yet know how to name. Some men approached the platform, speaking loudly, demanding immediate measures. He must be removed from leadership. If he will not step down willingly, then by order. The moderator, trembling, proposed ending the assembly, citing the risk of disorder. I descended the wooden steps slowly while people came to me in alternating waves, some to attack me with words, others to whisper, "We are praying for you," without courage to say it aloud. A child slipped from her mother's hand and gave me a crumpled flower. The mother pulled her back without looking at me. The scene was so simple and so striking that I almost lost my breath. The news of what happened in the square spread through the city and reached neighboring towns. In a few days I received formal notices asking me to step back for an indefinite time from public duties. It was not an official expulsion, but everything around me was adjusted so I would understand the message. Contracts canceled, invitations withdrawn, benefactors pulled away. An old acquaintance came to me one night, and with sincerity I respect to this day, said, "They are arranging for you to leave the city for a while until things calm down. They say it is for your protection, but you and I know it is for their peace." I thanked him, offered water, and we remained a few minutes in silence because there were things neither of us wanted to profane with explanations. In the meantime, the pressure on Karim increased. They called him in for a counseling conversation. I later learned that they presented him with two questions. Are you with your father, or with tradition? There was no room for nuance. It was one side or the other. My son came home late, his face weary. He sat at the edge of the bed and stared at his hands as if they held a map to be deciphered. I sat beside him, and for a moment we were two men without titles, without certainties. He spoke first, and his voice came from a place I recognized. "Father, I am with the truth, and I am afraid of taking the wrong path." I wanted to resolve his anguish with a ready-made answer, but I no longer lived by ready-made answers. I said, "The truth does not despise you when you walk slowly. It calls you back even when you stumble." He nodded without lifting his eyes. The decision to remain firm came at a practical cost that is not pretty to tell, but it is honest. I lost the house where we held gatherings. I lost an old financial support. I lost the ease of moving through the spaces I had helped to build. I gained silence and longer roads. I gained closed doors. I gained the right to hear people speak about me on street corners as if I no longer existed. And in the midst of all this, a simple certainty repeated inside me like a refrain: peace is greater than fear. I did not feel heroism. I felt obedience, not to an institution, but to that gentle voice that had freed me inside. That obedience had no applause, it had roots. The square with its echoes did not leave me for weeks. With every memory, I mentally reviewed the scene, trying to understand where I could have been more diplomatic, where I could have avoided wounds. I discovered that sometimes truth spoken with humility hurts because it confronts, not because it wounds out of intent. I discovered that men who carry the responsibility of guiding people also feel fear of losing control, and fear wears the garments of zeal. I discovered finally that courage is not shouting louder. It is remaining whole when pressure demands that you deny what you have seen. It was in that crossing that I recognized the real battle. It was not against people nor against structures. It was against my own fear. Fear of losing my name, fear of disappointing my son, fear of walking without the old armor. When I named that fear, it lost some of its strength. The reaction of the crowd was not unanimous, but it was clear. One part distanced itself, another part kept watching from afar, and a silent minority began to seek me out discreetly. They were people with stories I had never heard because my haste for answers had not given them space. A widow carrying a grief without permission, a shopkeeper who had learned to smile to hide the fact he had not slept for months, a young man who told me without embellishment, "I always feared your rigidity. Today, for the first time, I heard you as a man." These conversations did not give me back a position. They gave me humanity. And without anyone arranging it, a fragile network of care began to emerge, made of timid prayers, short messages, loaves of bread left at the door without a name. And Karim? Karim became my most honest mirror. He did not rush into public declarations, nor did he defend me on impulse, nor attack me to satisfy the crowd. He stayed, and staying at that moment was the costliest gesture. I saw him lose invitations, I saw friendships turn superficial, I saw advice heavy with guilt turn into demands. Even so, he continued coming home, sitting at the table, asking little and observing much. At times I found him in his room revisiting the video of the debate. Other times he stood in the doorway on that early morning, as if he wanted to make sure I was still myself, and I was only changed. When I think of that day in the square, the moment my words came out, I would rather lose everything than deny the one who gave me life. I do not hear the echo of bravado. I hear the exact sound of what my heart had become capable of bearing. The divided crowd, my son's tears, the tension of the leaders, the child's crumpled flower, the whispers of a few. All of this made up the scenery of the last bend before a new stretch of the path. I did not know what tomorrow would be like, but I knew I was not alone. And I desperately needed to learn to live the next day with this new faithfulness. A faithfulness not measured by titles, but by love. The true battle I understood there was not against men. If it were, I would have chosen the best answers, sharpened my speech, won applause. The true battle was against the fear that lives within, the fear of losing what gives us identity when God decides to give a new name to what we are. And that battle began to be won not when the assembly ended, but when my heart learned to remain in the peace that visited me that early morning. It was that peace that made me descend the steps without hatred. It was that peace that kept me from returning offense with offense. It was that peace that sustained my son in tears, without forcing him into instant positions. It was that peace that slowly opened the path I still needed to walk. After that public confrontation that changed everything, the days that followed were a constant test of what had been born inside me. I no longer spoke as before because my very words had been transformed by the experience I had lived. People noticed that there was in me a new serenity, a different firmness, one that no longer came from authority won on a platform, but from the peace I carried in my heart. And even in the midst of losses and rejections, I realized that this peace remained as if it were a fountain that never dried up. My son Karim began to draw closer slowly. At first there was only silence and distance, but little by little he began to observe me carefully. He noticed that the hard man who had raised him was no longer there in the same way. Instead of rigidity, he saw patience. Instead of anger, gentleness. I caught him looking at me sometimes, almost in secret, like someone trying to understand whether this was real or just a passing mask. I did not need to convince him with speeches. What touched him was the visible transformation in the way I treated people, listened, and served. I began to witness not only with words, but with life. I no longer cared if there was a platform or a crowd. I met people in alleys and markets and the simplest houses, and there I shared what had happened to me. It was no longer a sermon of condemnation, but a testimony of love. And surprisingly, those who were persecuted, rejected, or forgotten began to seek me out. I listened to them, offered help, shared the little I had, and each gesture seemed to carry an authority I had never known before. With time, I realized that without planning, I had become a symbol of courage and faith for some. Not because I wanted that title, but because my life showed that it is possible to lose everything and still remain in peace. And it was in this simplicity, in this new path, that the fruits of transformation began to bloom before all eyes still willing to see.
And after hearing this intense and transformative story, I want to look at you who stayed with us until now and say something very important. The same grace that reached Omar Hassan, a convicted imam and declared enemy of Christianity, can also reach your life today. Maybe you are struggling with emptiness. Maybe you carry wounds from the past. Maybe you even have anger or doubts about faith. But just as Omar once opened his heart in a moment of despair and cried out for the truth, You too can make that decision right now. If you wish to surrender your life, repeat with me out loud. I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Leave this message in the comments. I accept Jesus. This simple declaration can be the beginning of a new journey, a life of peace that does not depend on circumstances, but on a real encounter with the one who loves you unconditionally. And now check if you are already subscribed here to the channel, activate the notification bell so you do not miss any testimony, leave your like so that this message can reach even more people, and if you stayed until the end, write in the comments, I love Jesus. This way we will know that you walked with us until here, and that this story spoke deeply to your heart. And get ready, because the next video that is appearing right now on your screen will impact you just as much as this one. You will hear the story of someone who challenged Charlie Kirk and was set free from the occult, a real Christian testimony that will move you. Click now and continue on this journey of faith and transformation.